Back, Adam Maguire here, sitting in for Richard. You can contact us by text to 51551. You can email thebusiness@rte, or you can tweet thebusinessRTE. Well, the music world has been making headlines this week as Taylor Swift was officially declared a billionaire. But our next guest is more interested in the world of hip-hop and thinks we can learn more from Jay-Z than we can from Warren Buffett. Nels Abbey is the author of the Hip-Hop MBA, Lessons in Cutthroat Capitalism from Rap's Moguls. Nels, hip-hop really does seem to be rewriting the rules of business. Before we start, the one mogul, Sean Combs, or Puff Daddy, was back in the news this week for all the wrong reasons, really. Remind us about him and how big a noise he is in hip-hop.
Well, Puff Daddy or Sean Combs is pretty much the central figure in terms of hip hop entrepreneurialism. I often describe him as a king of black consumerism, capitalism, and of course culture. He was somebody who broke down so many doors, really was a really truly a visionary in so many areas of production, so many areas of just of business. And seeing his collapse is very concerning, but we, of course, are very concerned about the alleged victims.
Yeah, well, given those recent events, he might not be the best case study for your thesis. But at what point did you start to think of hip-hop artists in general as good inspiration for entrepreneurs? Why did you think they were worth focusing in on?
So my previous background, I've worn many hats in my days. I used to work in financial services, and I used to I still work in media. And something I always found rather interesting, that when you see people speaking about business inspiration, and you'd always get these case studies of people really, really great business thinking. And I would just sit there and think to myself that none of these people ever look or sound very alternative, or look or sound like myself, or so black or working class. So I thought to myself, well, I often listen to the rappers and watch their business moves, and I learn quite a bit from them. And I thought that there's actually a capitalism story here, a fascinating capitalism story, and there's also a key business process story here too. It's almost a story about capitalism for people who don't have any capital.
So make the case for us then. Why is Jay-Z a better role model for an entrepreneur than Warren Buffett?
Warren Buffett is pretty much a nepo baby, as we call them right now. His dad was an elected politician and a wealthy man himself. Warren Buffett pretty much went into an industry that he himself admitted has always been welcoming and beneficial to people like him. So when by his own words, by the time he was in his early 20s, he knew that it would be it would take some doing for him to be unsuccessful in life. Jay-Z came from nothing, the absolute gutter. In fact, and the problem is, when we take something like Jay-Z, these guys end up taking very, very lopsided risks that are not really going to really pay off well for them, that you're taking a high amount of risk with low amount of potential rewards. So Jay-Z found himself within that realm too. He found himself within the drug business at a very, very young age. But he took what he learned from the actual business and his actual talent for poetry, for rap music, and combined the two of them together and created an empire of his own by virtue of the fact that all doors were closed to him. Essentially, the key thing I'm saying is that Warren Buffett, Jay-Z has a lot more to teach us about capitalism and business than Warren Buffett, because Jay-Z's had to create something out of absolutely nothing.
And he isn't the only hip-hop artist to have that drug connection. And as you say, it was often the only source of funding for a lot of these artists who had nothing else, and they couldn't turn to a bank and look for a loan there.
No, you couldn't. No, far from it. The bank was completely shut. Pretty much most methods of raising money were completely shut, because when it came to people who come from economically challenged backgrounds, particularly the United States of America, most black men, the first successful entrepreneur they will meet is the local drug dealer. So the first source of income they will ever have, they'll ever find, or so, would be the first investment opportunity would come from the local drug dealer. Sometimes the first potential employer would be the local drug dealer. So when it came to rap music emerged in the pitfalls of the economic bonfire of the 70s, went into the crack epidemic of the 80s. But what happens that all the money that came from the crack epidemic, or the money that came from the drug trade, needed to find somewhere where it could be actually legitimized, and rap music became one of those places, one of those avenues where they could actually find legitimate income or cleansing opportunities. And so many of the actual platforms, so many of the big record labels that today we consider to be really, really successful, found their origins or their first investment base in the drug trade.
Hip hop generally would be seen as a very male led industry, often misogynistic, and certainly in its early years. But you trace the big bang of the genre back to a female pioneer. Tell me about Sylvia Robinson.
Yeah, so Sylvia Robinson was a young lady who found her break in the music business around the age of 16 in the late 40s. She was part of a duo called Sylvia and Mickey, and she moved with the business. So from that early R&B era, she was there. Then when it came to disco time, when it came to the period of disco, she was also a figure in in the disco period. She was pretty much finished in the business by the late 70s. She was finished in the business. She was down on her luck financially. She was married to a man called Joe Robinson, who was rather connected to in the mafia realm, but the intersection between the mafia and the music business, which exists till this very day. So she went out one evening with her son, and her son took her to a nightclub. And when Sylvia got to the nightclub with her son, she saw young people performing rap songs over instrumentals to popular disco records, and she was seeing the reaction people were getting from it. She just came up with the idea that if you can do this in the club, you can do it on the record. If you can do it on the record, if the reactions like this, then it could blow up. But what really happened when it came to Sylvia Robinson is that the core element of business development, proving the concept, finding the value, finding the potential value, identifying the customer base, all the heavy lifting of the business development of hip hop, similar to childbirth, was done by Sylvia Robinson. Without Sylvia Robinson, there would be no commercial big bang hip hop that we know today. It just wouldn't exist.
Hip hop, one of the cornerstone of hip hop is branding, and the branding of the hip hop artists themselves, but also their connection with brands as well. How important is that in hip hop and the name dropping of popular products and so on?
Jay-Z is a perfect example of this. Jay-Z synonymized himself with the best of products in the actual business, with the most highbrow products that you could think of. He made it almost part of himself. So Cristal, for example, which is a very, very expensive champagne brand that people like myself can certainly not afford. I'm sure you can afford it, and I'm sure I'm sure you can. But the thing about Jay-Z is that he synonymized himself with the Bentleys, with the Cristals, and he used that to make himself more popular and more viable as an artist. But then additionally too, it became clear that him or other rappers mentioning these actual brands on records made the brands more popular. Their brands were used to enhance the brands of big companies, and it took off from there.
And they're becoming investors as well. A lot of rap artists have diversified beyond making money from music to making money from companies too.
Diversification became a critical part of success. In fact, diversification was the most important part of taking the rapper from being just, okay, I'm somebody who makes money out of music, I've got a few million to my name, or potentially even tens of millions to my name, to somebody who's potentially becoming a billionaire.
Established companies can benefit from their association with rap artists. Some, though, get it wrong. Jay-Z would have mentioned Cristal a lot in his songs.
Yep.
They ended up, though, essentially turning their back on him, or he turned their back on them.
Yeah, he did. So the CEO of Cristal was asked by The Economist about, what does he think of rappers really embracing their brand? And he said something, well, they don't the CEO of Cristal responded to The Economist that what can you do about it? That he can't stop them from consuming the drink and singing about it. Jay-Z is a Machiavellian businessman, a truly brilliant businessman. Jay-Z, who had promoted Cristal and probably earned them hundreds of millions in revenue, Jay-Z pretty much overnight dumped Cristal, and as opposed to promoting them, started to demote them and denigrate them in the music. And he called for a boycott of Cristal, a champagne brand that's only affordable to the top 1% to 2% of champagne consumers. And the boycott actually worked. The boycott actually led to a dip in Cristal sales. But what Jay-Z did that was quite interesting at the exact same time, that as opposed to just boycotting Cristal, he then created a rival brand. And it took off. So Jay-Z just within the last couple of years sold his brand of champagne to Louis Vuitton, Moet, and Hennessy for about $300 million. So it might be one of the most profitable boycotts of all time.
There are companies who would appreciate the benefit of being mentioned by Jay-Z, and probably some that would spend millions to cozy up to the hip-hop world today, but they probably would have run a mile from it back in the 70s or 80s. Some might have even supported the efforts that were made to ban hip-hop at its origin. Is there a lesson here for businesses in the establishment on how they treat emerging industries, particularly those being driven by non-white creators and audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's completely a message there. In fact, there's a message that goes even beyond just business. It goes into politics too. If you look at the Democrats in America, the drive to ban rap music was driven by Tipper Gore, who was Al Gore, who was Vice President Al Gore's wife at the time, was driven by Tipper Gore and Al Gore, and these were the left-leaning social conservatives. Particularly, of course, which is understandable as far as the misogyny and everything else was concerned. But you have to understand the key lesson of business is that youth culture is always going to be shocking to older business people. Youth culture, that's the drive, that's the rebellious nature of youth culture. It's how they have done things time and time and time and time again for time immemorial. Business has to embrace younger people in order to actually understand the future. So if you take, for example, Apple right now, Apple is the largest company in the world. They went out of their way to embrace rappers. They put those headphones of the iPod in every single rap song you could name. So it quickly just found its way. It found its way pretty much into mainstream culture and mainstream popularity. And from there also, Apple actually purchased Dr. Dre's company, Beats by Dre, making Dr. Dre a billionaire himself. But the key thing about it is that these towers of youth culture who really understand it, these drivers of it, are people that we should try and do better to understand and try and do better to align ourselves with, as where it's simple to do, where it's safe to do so, where it's profitable to do so, and where it is potentially safe to do so, because sometimes it can blow up in your face too, as happened, of course, with Kanye West and Adidas. The problem with that we are dealing with the rebellious nature of youth culture is that it's inherently rebellious, and eventually it will rebel against you too.
Hip hop has matured in a lot of ways, certainly as a business. That misogynistic background that it would have, has it moved on from that? Has it developed beyond that?
Well, the women right now in hip hop are pretty much moving into a dominant position. So the young female rappers are coming up, or who are coming up right now, are now pretty much the people who are very, very, who are starting to be at the forefront of the business. Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, these are people who are coming up and they're very, very much, they're as aggressive about their business and their dominance and their determination to stay in the business and not be one-hit wonders, but really just be strong presence and commanding voices in the business for as long as potentially possible. And so as a result of that, I wouldn't say that's actually easing off. That's easing up the misogyny as far as hip hop's concerned. No, I would not. I would say that's actually just mean that women are having more powerful positions. In the actual book, I compare Missy Elliott to Margaret Thatcher, and I point out how they have played different roles. Missy Elliott had a clear diversifying role, whereas Margaret Thatcher did not. She was the only woman in her own cabinet. Whereas Missy Elliott, when she was at the top of the actual business, made sure she brought other women along with her.
As you say, rebellion is at the heart of hip hop and its origins. But you now have these established businesses. You have a second generation of artists coming through. A lot of money in the industry and artists who are cozying up to major brands as well. Is it possible for it to maintain that rebelliousness and that anti-establishment edge?
I think that some people in rap music or so, even like are growing with the actual culture. They're taking the culture in the direction of maturity. If this is Jay-Z's last album, well, Jay-Z was always much older than his years and a lot wiser than his years too. But his last album, Jay-Z went from rapping about Cristal or anything else they would have rapped about in the past to rapping about wills and leaving inheritance for his children and buying up whole areas, as opposed to actually his escapades as a drug dealer when he was a young man. He's gone to speaking almost like thinking of legacy and thinking of the dynasty that him and his wife are building together, which is very, very refreshing a thing to see. So what then happens that those people, as opposed to them actually selling the shock factor of youth or rebelliousness of youth, they sell the wisdom of old age, but packaged with a very, very different type of rebelliousness, more mature, more thinking about things as opposed to actually just say bashing your head against the system, but trying to figure out how you're going to win in business and really win big and take over corporations and that sort of stuff. So you're seeing people who are just who've gone from being rappers, per se, rappers when they were young, or aggressive gangster rappers, to become a billionaire gentleman rappers.
I wonder if we'll ever hear Jay-Z's rap about the challenges of lower back pain. But there are lots of really interesting stories in there. Many thanks for joining us, Nels, and for talking through some of them.
Thank you.
And the Hip-Hop MBA, Lessons in Cutthroat Capitalism from Rap's Moguls by Nels Abbey, is published by Canongate. Now, sticking with the music scene,